In the year 1948, not long after the world had barely settled from the upheaval of the Second World War, an eerie incident unfolded in the skies near Fort Knox, Kentucky. It was a brisk January afternoon, the 7th day of the month to be exact, when the operators in the control tower of the neighboring Godman Army Airfield caught sight of a luminous, unidentified object floating eerily in the sky. This sighting, coupled with the subsequent events, including the enigmatic demise of a pilot from the Kentucky National Guard, would come to be known as the Mantell UFO incident. Fast forward almost 4 decades, a young soldier, that's me, found himself assigned to Fort Campbell, another Army base in Kentucky, located approximately 130 miles southwest of Fort Knox. Little did I know, my tenure at this base would also be marked by bizarre occurrences. My story, which I'm about to unfold, begins with strange lights over Kentucky, a tale that weaves through the mist of uncertainty, offering a choice between belief and disbelief. This mist obscures the line between reality and imagination, fact and fiction. It's a realm where many succumb to falsehoods or reject truths too strange to accept. But in this fog of war, it's up to you to discern what to believe. Growing up near Fort Campbell, I was always somewhat open to the idea of the unexplained, despite my skepticism. However, I never actively sought out these mysteries. They seemed to find me, always putting me in the wrong place at the wrong time. The question that haunts me is why? Why was I continually drawn into these unexplainable events? Take, for instance, the Kentucky Goblin story of 1955. In that incident, which had local police and officials baffled, a security detail of 4 Army police officers from Fort Campbell was dispatched to investigate. During my time with the military police on base, I found myself embroiled in similar bizarre situations. Maybe it's just part of the job, but most of my experiences were rather mundane. They ranged from finding a soldier tending to his secret marijuana plantation in a secluded field, to the more heart-wrenching discovery of a young soldier who had taken his own life, hanging from a tree on a remote back road. However, amidst these routine encounters, there were incidents that defied conventional explanation. Some of these stories might already be familiar to you. My strangest encounters predominantly occurred during nighttime patrols in the sprawling wild ranges of Fort Campbell, known as the Back 40. But there was one particular incident that stands out, and it happened under rather ordinary circumstances, while I was carrying my laundry back to my base apartment. For those in the military, it might seem odd for a junior soldier to be assigned private housing, even if it was just a modest apartment in a refurbished complex of old warehouses. I suppose I was just lucky not to be confined to the barracks. This peculiar incident unfolded in early 1987. I had recently returned from a deployment in Honduras that December and had been reassigned from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to my new command at Fort Campbell. Initially, I continued serving in my original communications MOS, but within a few months, my unit would discover that. Having reached the limit for radio operators, my company commander presented me with an opportunity to select a new position on the base. I opted for an assignment with the military police, a field that had been my second choice when I enlisted, inspired partly by my stepdad's career in law enforcement. But this career shift was still a couple of months away. Before all that, just a few weeks after I'd settled into my small apartment, I found myself at a local laundromat one evening. The laundry machines in my complex were notoriously unreliable, and I needed to get my clothes cleaned. After finishing my laundry, I stayed out unusually late, dropping quarters into video games at a nearby arcade, a simple way to pass time before heading back to my apartment. Carrying my basket of freshly laundered clothes from my car, I started crossing the parking lot. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed several blinking lights in the sky towards the west, over the Back 40 of the base. A quick glance revealed the familiar red and white lights of Chinook helicopters flying in formation. It was a common sight, with aircraft frequently buzzing over the base at all hours. My eyes drifted towards what I assumed was the moon, bright and low on the horizon. But then I stopped in my tracks. This wasn't the moon. The object in the sky was cube-shaped, oddly tilted as if balancing on one corner. I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't like any aircraft I knew of. No blinking lights, nothing that suggested conventional design. It was a massive, bright cube, hanging motionless in the air, its exterior seemingly transparent and the light emanating from within. As I watched, I estimated its size to be much larger than the Chinooks, comparable to a large marble held at arm's length. Then, a sudden, reddish-orange glow appeared at the object's bottom corner, shooting downwards like a fiery streak before vanishing as quickly as it appeared, re-emerging in roughly 5-second intervals. The Chinooks were drawing closer, and I wondered what would happen when they reached it. The object had remained static until then, but abruptly, it shot across the sky in a straight line, covering a mile in mere seconds, then halted as suddenly as it had moved. The reddish glow continued to pulse beneath it. The helicopters adjusted their course, slowly banking towards the object's new location. About 15 seconds later, the object darted off again in a different direction, the helicopters banking to follow. It was almost as if the object was teasing them, flaunting its superior maneuverability. For a couple of minutes, this bizarre dance continued, the object making abrupt movements, the Chinooks adjusting their flight path, trying to keep up. Finally, the object slid across the sky one last time, heading further west and quickly disappearing from view. Standing in the parking lot, laundry basket forgotten in my arms, I continued to stare at the spot where the object had vanished, half expecting it to reappear. But it didn't. Shaking off the surreal experience, I finally turned my attention back to my surroundings, the distant sky still etched in my mind as I glanced around the empty parking lot, the night's stillness contrasting sharply with the inexplicable event I had just witnessed. As I stood there, lost in the spectacle of the shifting light in the sky, I hadn't realized that a crowd had gathered around me in the parking lot. Many of them were still gazing upwards, as entranced as I had been. I turned to the person closest to me, a sense of bewilderment shared between us, and hesitantly asked what that thing was. He merely shrugged, his eyes reflecting a mix of confusion and awe, and muttered that he didn't know. He took one last look at the sky, then walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I lingered for another minute, scanning the sky one last time before turning back towards my building and heading inside, the night's mystery still weighing heavily on my mind. The next day at work, despite the number of witnesses, the incident wasn't a topic of conversation. There was no mention of the strange object in the local news or papers either. I wasn't surprised, though. These kinds of stories, as bizarre as they might seem, often get shrugged off. Most people, like myself, chalk it up to an unexplainable occurrence and don't dwell on it, at least until it happens again or someone else shares a similar experience. I've heard that combat veterans often avoid discussing their war experiences, even with their families, but might open up to another combat veteran who could understand without judgment or excessive questioning. Maybe witnessing these strange events is somewhat similar, albeit obviously less traumatizing. In my case, it's just something you don't talk about, either to avoid ridicule or simply because you're not even sure of what you saw. Even years later, I still have no idea what it was that I saw that night. Over the years, I've spent a fair amount of time researching similar stories, seeking some explanation for what I witnessed. I've come to realize that neither the U.S. military nor the state of Kentucky are strangers to such unexplained phenomena. I'm also increasingly aware that, at least until recently, the U.S. government and military usually do their best to distance themselves from these kinds of unusual events, whatever the reasons may be. I also believe that many of these incidents go unreported, like mine did. They only seem to gain public attention when someone is injured, disappears, or gets killed. One notable example is the Mantell UFO incident. On that cold afternoon in January 1948, when the tower operators and other Army officials at Fort Knox spotted that bright, unidentified object, They probably had the same questions I did 40 years later. What the hell am I seeing? Their sighting was quickly validated by incoming reports from local highway patrol officers and over 24 other military personnel from nearby installations, some of whom reported seeing the object clearly from over 150 miles away. At the same time, 4 pilots, including Captain Thomas F. Mantell, were airborne and heading to Godman Airfield. The control tower personnel, who had been observing the object, radioed them to divert and inspect it. 3 of the pilots broke off, either due to insufficient fuel or low oxygen levels, as they pursued the object into higher altitudes. Despite his plane not being equipped with oxygen either, Mantell was the only one who continued his upward chase. When he reached approximately 15,000 feet, Godman Tower operators received a transmission from Captain Mantell. He reported the object as being directly ahead and above him, moving at about half his speed of 180 miles per hour. He described it as a metallic object, possibly reflecting sunlight, and of tremendous size. Mantell was still climbing, trying to get a closer look. At 3:15 p.m., Mantell transmitted his final communication, stating the object was ascending faster. At that moment, as Captain Mantell soared to 20,000 feet, determined to close in on the enigmatic object, he declared he would abandon the chase if he couldn't get any closer. Tragically, the 25-year-old pilot's plane soon entered a death spiral, plummeting back to Earth before impacting the ground and shattering into pieces. From the transcripts of Godman Airfield, they recovered his watch at the crash site, which had eerily stopped at 3:18 p.m. Meanwhile, the UFO he was pursuing had vanished without a trace. A few weeks prior to this incident, there had been a similar encounter. Investigators later concluded that the bright object chased by pilots in that case was actually an unusually bright Venus, visible in the night sky. They suggested that Mantell, in his pursuit during daylight, might have made the same mistake. His plane, not equipped for high altitudes and lacking oxygen, likely caused him to black out and lose control. The cockpit latches were found locked upon impact, indicating no attempt to bail out. However, this explanation didn't satisfy the multitude of eyewitness accounts, nor did it account for the object's bizarre movements. Eyewitnesses described the object in various ways. Some saw it as pear or bulb-shaped, others as a flaming ball of fire, and still others described it as red, flaming, and cone-shaped. If not Venus, the government suggested it might have been a skyhook Navy weather balloon with sunlight reflecting off its surface. This balloon program was highly classified at the time, unknown to many, including military personnel not privy to the top-secret program. These balloons were massive, reaching diameters of 100 feet and altitudes over 60,000 feet, which could explain what many witnesses saw. Driven by curiosity, I delved into the unclassified official report of the incident. The report initially stated that the object was at a heading of 220 degrees from Godman Field, placing it an unknown distance to the southwest. It addressed the possibility of a bright planet, then stated that a secret skyhook balloon had been released from Clinton County Airport in Ohio that afternoon. The official Air Force conclusion combined both these explanations: the stationary planet Venus, observed by some witnesses, and the skyhook balloon that had drifted 250 miles southwest. Yet, these conclusions seemed to contradict both the report's details and the eyewitness testimonies. Captain Mantell and the Godman Field personnel, including the commanding officer Colonel Hicks, all signed sworn statements attesting to their accounts, aviation experience, visual acuity, and mental health. Colonel Hicks himself stated that the object appeared to remain stationary for at least 1.5 hours before the P-51s began their approach. The report's implications were perplexing. It suggested that the men at Godman Field had been staring at Venus all that time, that Mantell and the other pilots directed their flight path towards this abnormally bright Venus, and, by a twist of fate, Mantell might have caught sight of a fast-moving skyhook balloon as he approached Kentucky's southern border. This layered explanation, while plausible, left gaps that the sworn testimonies and my own experience couldn't reconcile. As I delved deeper into the nuances of the report, it became clear that the object spotted was at a high enough altitude to be visible from 60 to 80 miles away in all directions, seen from cities like Madisonville, Elizabethtown, and Mansville. The military personnel were looking at what they believed to be the stationary Venus to the southwest, while civilians saw the weather balloon as it traversed the sky. The report's conclusion seemed to imply that Mantell, in his pursuit, had shifted his focus from a bright planet on the horizon to a reflective weather balloon tens of thousands of feet overhead. While this scenario is conceivable, it's somewhat muddled by contradictions from Ohio State astronomers who, years later, claimed that Venus wouldn't have been clearly visible during the afternoon daylight. My own questions lingered. If the object was indeed a weather balloon, why did Mantell first report it moving at half his speed, estimated at 180 miles per hour, and then state that the object had increased its speed, matching or surpassing his own, as he ascended? There isn't much statistical data available on the specifics of the skyhook balloons, but modern weather balloons typically ascend at about 1,000 feet per minute, which translates to just over 11 miles per hour, significantly slower than what Mantell described. These modern balloons can reach over 100,000 feet in a couple of hours before bursting, traveling no more than about 125 miles during this period, giving an approximate forward speed of only 60 to 70 miles per hour. The report attempted to explain the erratic movements and incredible speed reported by witnesses and Mantell as optical illusions caused by cloud movement. However, this doesn't quite align with the report's implication that this particular skyhook balloon traveled over 250 miles southwest from its release point and reached altitudes over 60,000 feet without bursting. Additionally, while Mantell described the object as tremendous in size, the final report concluded it was just a large plastic balloon, still more than 40,000 feet above him. This conclusion raises further questions. Even at a maximum width of 100 feet, a skyhook balloon at 40,000 feet would appear as a tiny speck from Mantell's perspective, hardly something tremendous. Further adding to the mystery, one of Mantell's longtime friends, when asked about why Mantell would risk his life by ascending over 15,000 feet without proper equipment, could only speculate that Mantell was chasing something he believed to be more important than his life or family. This theory implies a level of determination and conviction in Mantell that goes beyond the explanation of a mere weather balloon. In a bizarre twist, only a few hours after Mantell's plane crashed, new reports emerged from Lockbourne Air Force Base, 300 miles away in Ohio, and only 50 miles northeast of Clinton County Airport, where the skyhook balloon implicated in Mantell's death was launched. Another unidentified object had been spotted, adding yet another layer of complexity to an already perplexing series of events. This newly spotted object, far stranger than anything witnessed earlier that day, quickly drew the attention of military pilots and ground personnel at Lockbourne Air Force Base, as well as staff from Clinton County Airport, where the skyhook balloon had been released. Located approximately 5 miles southwest of Lockbourne Air Base, this new enigmatic object was described by witnesses as an enormous, round, oval, or cone-shaped, bright glowing entity. It was specifically noted that it couldn't be a star, considering the cloudy, overcast sky. Air traffic controller Alex Boudreau pointed out that the wind was blowing east to west at the time. Had it been a balloon or any lighter-than aircraft, it would have drifted with the wind, but this object didn't. This mysterious object exhibited a variety of colors, shifting from white to amber yellow to red, from around 7:25 p.m. until it finally vanished around 8 p.m. Its behavior was markedly different and more peculiar than the object observed by Mantell and the personnel at Godman Airfield. Multiple witnesses, confident in their observations and mental state, signed sworn statements to this effect. As I delved deeper into the nuances of the report, It became clear that the object spotted was at a high enough altitude to be visible from 60 to 80 miles away in all directions, seen from cities like Madisonville, Elizabethtown, and Mansville. The military personnel were looking at what they believed to be the stationary Venus to the southwest, while civilians saw the weather balloon as it traversed the sky. The report's conclusion seemed to imply that Mantell, in his pursuit, had shifted his focus from a bright planet on the horizon to a reflective weather balloon tens of thousands of feet overhead. While this scenario is conceivable, it's somewhat muddled by contradictions from Ohio State astronomers who, years later, claimed that Venus wouldn't have been clearly visible during the afternoon daylight. My own questions lingered. If the object was indeed a weather balloon, why did Mantell first report it moving at half his speed, estimated at 180 miles per hour, and then state that the object had increased its speed, matching or surpassing his own, as he ascended? There isn't much statistical data available on the specifics of the skyhook balloons, but modern weather balloons typically ascend at about 1,000 feet per minute, which translates to just over 11 miles per hour, significantly slower than what Mantell described. These modern balloons can reach over 100,000 feet in a couple of hours before bursting, traveling no more than about 125 miles during this period, giving an approximate forward speed of only 60 to 70 miles per hour. The report attempted to explain the erratic movements and incredible speed reported by witnesses and Mantell as optical illusions caused by cloud movement. However, this doesn't quite align with the report's implication that this particular skyhook balloon traveled over 250 miles southwest from its release point and reached altitudes over 60,000 feet without bursting. Additionally, while Mantell described the object as tremendous in size, the final report concluded it was just a large plastic balloon, still more than 40,000 feet above him. This conclusion raises further questions. Even at a maximum width of 100 feet, a skyhook balloon at 40,000 feet would appear as a tiny speck from Mantell's perspective, hardly something tremendous. Further adding to the mystery, one of Mantell's longtime friends, when asked about why Mantell would risk his life by ascending over 15,000 feet without proper equipment, could only speculate that Mantell was chasing something he believed to be more important than his life or family. This theory implies a level of determination and conviction in Mantell that goes beyond the explanation of a mere weather balloon. In a bizarre twist, only a few hours after Mantell's plane crashed, new reports emerged from Lockbourne Air Force Base, 300 miles away in Ohio, and only 50 miles northeast of Clinton County Airport, where the skyhook balloon implicated in Mantell's death was launched. Another unidentified object had been spotted, adding yet another layer of complexity to an already perplexing series of events. This newly spotted object, far stranger than anything witnessed earlier that day, quickly drew the attention of military pilots and ground personnel at Lockbourne Air Force Base, as well as staff from Clinton County Airport, where the skyhook balloon had been released. Located approximately 5 miles southwest of Lockbourne Air Base, this new enigmatic object was described by witnesses as an enormous, round, oval, or cone-shaped, bright glowing entity. It was specifically noted that it couldn't be a star, considering the cloudy, overcast sky. Air traffic controller Alex Boudreau pointed out that the wind was blowing east to west at the time. Had it been a balloon or any lighter-than aircraft, it would have drifted with the wind, but this object didn't. This mysterious object exhibited a variety of colors, shifting from white to amber yellow to red, from around 7:25 p.m. until it finally vanished around 8 p.m. Its behavior was markedly different and more peculiar than the object observed by Mantell and the personnel at Godman Airfield. Multiple witnesses, confident in their observations and mental state, signed sworn statements to this effect. Albert Pickering, a 26-year-old control tower operator at Lockbourne, first noticed the object around 7:25 p.m. from the front steps of his operations building. Air Force Captain Charles McGee also saw the bright object from his aircraft's cockpit as he approached the Lockbourne runway for landing. He continued to observe the object even after landing and while taxiing on the runway. Initially, the object seemed to hover, barely moving or remaining stationary at about 3,000 feet. Suddenly, it vanished, rocketing upwards into the cloudy overcast at 10,000 feet. After watching it disappear, Pickering was joined by 25-year-old Airways operator Frank Eisel. The object then descended from the clouds to hover again about 3,000 feet above the ground, becoming motionless once more. To their astonishment, the object began moving horizontally in a wide, 2-mile diameter circle over one position, completing this approximate 6-mile circumference in about 30 to 40 seconds. It then moved to another position and repeated this elliptical movement. During these circular horizontal movements, the object's speed was estimated to be an incredible 500 miles per hour, a calculation that matched the speed required to cover 6 miles in 30 to 40 seconds. Interestingly, both Pickering and Eisel noticed a comet-like tail streaming behind the object during its horizontal movements, but not during its vertical ascents and descents. This tail was about 5 times the length of the object's diameter. After completing its circular movements, the object again moved vertically, descending rapidly to near ground level in just a few seconds, lingering briefly before shooting back up to 10,000 feet into the clouds. It vanished soon after and was not seen again. Eisel mentioned that the Clinton County Tower, about 50 miles away, reported observing a similar or the same object in the same general direction and position at the same time as his and Pickering's sightings at Lockbourne. Pickering, citing his years of aviation experience, confidently stated that it was not a star, comet, or any astronomical body. He also ruled out the possibility of it being a balloon, flare, dirigible, or any military or private aircraft. Intriguingly, this unidentified object, appearing just hours after Mantell's plane crash and less than 300 miles away, was not mentioned in the final Air Force report of Mantell's incident. Coincidentally, the nearest military base to where Mantell crashed was Fort Campbell, located about 60 miles further west from the crash site. This proximity and timing further entangled the mysteries of that day, leaving more questions unanswered and adding to the intrigue of these unexplained aerial phenomena. And here's a fascinating detail. Fort Campbell is almost precisely 220 degrees southwest of Godman Airfield, the direction in which the initial object was spotted. Despite this, the official Mantell report, while acknowledging the possibility of a second weather balloon contributing to the confusion leading to Mantell's death, offers no concrete details on its origin or its release over Fort Campbell on January 7, 1948. This absence of information in the reports only fueled public skepticism. The death of a decorated young World War II pilot, coupled with vague and unsatisfactory explanations from military and government officials, was met with considerable suspicion and never fully accepted by the public. As for what Captain Mantell and the numerous other military and civilian witnesses saw that day near Fort Knox and Lockbourne Air Force Base in early 1948, I can't say. Similarly, I'm at a loss to explain what I, along with many other eyewitnesses, saw in the skies over Fort Campbell almost 40 years later in 1987. What's more, I didn't realize then that it wouldn't be the last time I'd see that same object over Fort Campbell, and the next time it would be alarmingly closer. Although my personal experiences in the Marine Corps didn't yield many wild stories, I do recall one incident that could be described as a UFO encounter. I believe it was in 2011, during one of my numerous cross-country flights, possibly en route to Atlanta, Georgia, from the Los Angeles International Airport to complete my airborne training at Fort Benning. It was night, and based on the map, I was probably over the northernmost part of Texas, or maybe Oklahoma. I remember sitting in the window seat on the left side of the plane, gazing out the window to the north. I was seated next to a gentleman and his wife. The gentleman, I believe, was a master sergeant, either in the Army or the Marines. We chatted for a while, but at some point, my attention turned to the window. The plane was at cruising altitude, around 35,000 feet, and I could see city lights scattered across the largely uninhabited landscape below, interspersed with vast patches of darkness. Below, the landscape was shrouded in clouds, and I noticed what looked like headlights moving along the ground. It was strange because the lights seemed to pass beneath trees, flickering and obscured, but they moved in the same direction as the plane. I was puzzled, realizing that we were 35,000 feet in the air. How could I see car headlights from such a height? And even if I could, how could they possibly be moving at the same speed as a commercial airliner at such a high altitude? The lights maintained their position consistently as I kept my eyes fixed on them, using the wing and the window frame as reference points. I watched these lights for several minutes, expecting them to vanish or reveal themselves as some sort of optical illusion. As I pondered the mysterious light, I began to question if it was simply a reflection of the plane's exterior lights on the clouds below. But this explanation didn't seem to hold up. The light appeared to be fragmented, as if broken by cloud cover and what seemed like trees, although these could have been more clouds. My next thought was another aircraft. However, the more I stared at it, the more implausible this seemed. If it were a smaller plane or helicopter with forward lights, it made no sense for it to travel as fast as our commercial airliner. And if it were another commercial plane, it was flying way below the typical cruising altitude. The light maintained a consistent position relative to our aircraft, which baffled me. There seemed to be no logical explanation for a light from our plane being projected below the clouds. Seeking some validation, I tapped the master sergeant sitting next to me for a sanity check. I asked him to look out the window and tell me if he saw what I was seeing. After a brief explanation of the bizarre headlights-like phenomenon, he leaned over, peered out, and acknowledged the oddity. Yeah, I see them. That's weird," he remarked, but soon returned to his conversation with his wife. Although I knew I wasn't imagining it, the phenomenon remained inexplicable. So, I continued to watch these lights for another 15 to 20 minutes, intrigued yet puzzled. Eventually, as we flew over a densely lit area, possibly a city, my attention waned. Whether the lights disappeared or were simply obscured by the city lights below, I couldn't tell. But once we passed this area, I glanced out the window again, and there were the lights, continuing their peculiar dance beneath the clouds and what seemed like tree branches. It was perplexing. We were high above any cloud cover, thousands, if not tens of thousands, of feet in the air, so any connection to the plane seemed increasingly unlikely. The sighting left me intrigued and bewildered. This experience remains my only personal encounter with something in the sky that I couldn't explain. In light of the Mantell UFO story and the strange events I've witnessed myself, it's clear that there are phenomena in our skies that defy conventional explanations. While I might not have more stories like this, recalling the Mantell incident within the context of my own experience has only deepened the mystery and my curiosity about what might be out there beyond our understanding.